Ladies and gentlemen, can I just read out this before we start? Can I remember members to sign the register in regard of attendance and any declarations to be made as a result of either personal or prejudicial agenda items? Can I remind members that the meeting is being webcast, therefore members must ensure that they speak clearly into the microphones. Can members please turn any mobile phones off or any similar devices that vibrate? If we hear a fire alarm, could everyone follow the signs that take us out to the car park opposite the police station? This is the implementation of the Welsh language standards. We welcome the use of Welsh language at public meetings. However, I have not received any notice that any committee members or invitees and attendees wish to use the Welsh language today. This meeting will therefore be conducted in English only. Can I just formally thank everyone for attending, and was there any apologies of absence?
Apologies received from Councillor Tomlinson.
Thank you. Declaration of interest. I'll ask Mr. Tim James if he'll take over that, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just remind members, if they have any declarations, they should please record them in the register, which is alongside the attendance register. I'm not aware of any declarations, but members, if you have any questions for me, I'll try and deal with those now. Thank you.
Any questions? No. We move on to item agenda 3, which is minutes of the previous licensing committee.
Can I just add, Chair, that I need to amend the minutes regarding the last committee and add Councillor Mills in attendance.
Minutes of the last meeting, we turn to page 3 to 26. We'll go through it page by page. Page 3. Pardon?
If we just go through the English version and not page by page, that should be fine. If we start on page 7.
Yeah. Starting on page 7 then.
You will have the Welsh minutes for the hearings as well, but obviously just skip those.
Right, so starting on page 7, page 8, from page 9. We're going to go through all of them. We also want to pages 15, 16, 17, pages 23, 24, 25, could someone move that they are a true record, please? Thank you. Just for accuracy again, we go through it once again. Any matters arising, page 7, 8.
There is the update on the illegal taxi driver on page 8. He's going to have an update in 8.
On page 8.
Oh, right.
On agenda item 5.1 is we're going to have an update from the what's it again?
Illegal taxi driver.
Illegal taxi drivers.
Okay.
That's in the minutes, is it? Yes. Oh, that's right. Okay, so we go to page 9. Then we go over to page 15, 16, 17, pages 23, 24, and 25. Could someone move the minutes as a true record? Thank you very much. So we now move on to item agenda 4. That's the updates on the progress of the collaboration of the licensing service of Torvine and Blaenau Gwent Borough County Councils, and it's pages 27 to 38. Perhaps Steve would like to introduce us or speak on this.
Thank you, Chair. This report is to update you on the progress of the collaboration between the two licensing services of Blaenau Gwent and Torvine Councils. The recommendations are that you note the contents of this report and give approval to the proposed business plan for the collaboration between Torvine and Blaenau Gwent County Borough Council's licensing services. And the options available to the committee are that members support and approve the business plan for 2016-17 as outlined in Appendix A to this report, or that members support and approve the business plan for 2016-17 as outlined in Appendix A to this report, subject to any suggested amendments to the plan that the committee consider necessary. I will point out straight away that this report, in a very, very similar format, is being presented to the Blaenau Gwent Licensing Committee next week. The report, by its pure nature, is an overall view for both councils. Some of the things in here are only relevant to Blaenau Gwent, some of the things in here are only relevant to Torvine. If there are any questions, I will separate them and explain them as we go through, or if you have any questions. It is very difficult to try and write the same report for two committees when they both need separate, different information. But we felt that both committees needed the same report so that there was consistency. The background to the report is, as the committee are well aware, that back in July 2015, both councils agreed that the collaboration would commence between the Public Protection Services, in particular training standards and licensing for Torvine and Blaenau Gwent. And in October 2015, the collaborations commenced. In particular, of interest to this committee today, the collaboration between the two licensing services. The reasoning for this was to do with being more robust with less resources and with the changing public sector economic situations, to try and move forward, keep an efficient service without increasing costs, or and if possible with a reduction in costs in the future. To start off with, the first thing that needed to happen was that all officers had to be authorised to work in both boroughs. That took place, that was the very initial stage of the collaboration. It meant that myself took over as team leader of both of the licensing sections in order to start the collaboration going. As we've moved forward, one of the first areas where the collaboration is showing signs of some success is that we have more available resources to do enforcement activities, including proactive work. If there's a need for any test purchases or joint visits, etc., then we have more resources. There is only one enforcement officer in Blaenau Gwent and two in Torvine. The setup of the two teams is totally different. It does mean that we have, on paper it looks as if there's 3 enforcement officers, but in reality they're set up slightly different, but the actual resources applied are more or less the same, because officers have different roles, and therefore only part of the role of the 2 officers down here is enforcement, because they also do the senior officer role. Up there they have 1 senior officer who only does the senior officer role and 1 enforcement officer. So if you can see, I liken it, we've got 2 half senior officers and 2 half enforcement officers here. They've got 1 full enforcement officer, 1 full senior officer. So, but it gives us a better resource available should we need to use it. There have been no particular operations that needed all 3 officers to be engaged in as of present. However, all of the enforcement staff are working together, they're collaborating, they're working in the opposite areas to learn the areas, to share information, and also to look at best practice, because one of the things that we're going to look at with this is to share best practice between the 2 councils for processes, procedures, and that is carrying on already. So in the future, when we do need to use more resources, they are available, as I say, for the test purchases. And as I outlined in 5.2, that policies and procedures is one of the things which is the main thing that is being worked on at the moment. And all of the senior officers, stroke enforcement officers, are looking at this in order to refine the systems. To try and get some consistency between policies would be a help as well, because obviously we're working with 2 different policies in some areas, particularly taxi licensing. You'll see a list on there of things which are work which are completed or ongoing. Some of these are only applicable to Blaenau Gwent, because we in Torfaen, their gambling policy and licensing policy have been approved some time ago. That was not the case in Blaenau Gwent. The gambling policy has been approved since I've been there, and the licensing policy is almost ready for approval now. So they were a bit behind in Blaenau Gwent. The review of the scheme of delegation in the Constitution was another thing which we have just recently completed. In Blaenau Gwent only, there is no need for any change in the Constitution in Torfaen. In fact, Blaenau Gwent is being produced to more or less mirror what we do in Torfaen, so that we have a similar scheme of delegation. So when officers have to do something, they go down more or less the same route. There are differences, but those differences are not significant to make a huge difference to operational needs. And as I've already said, that their senior officers are working, currently they're working particularly on the taxi policy to have a more consistent template of conditions. As you're aware, our taxi policy was approved only recently to commence in October last year, so it's fairly well up to date, but there have been some areas recently which have come to attention which even our policy could always needs reviewing to keep it as current as possible. But we're working to try and get a similar template. Again, because of the demographics of the area, it will be impossible to have identical policies. The demographics of the taxi trade in Blaenau Gwent is totally different to the demographics of the taxi trade in Torfaen. So therefore that has to be taken into account. And there are other things as well which will be looked at. And of course, as with all policies, they'll have to go out in consultation, and then when it comes back from consultation, each policy will be considered on their own merits, and any amendments to ours are likewise considered on their own merits. But the main thing is the template of the policy and the basics of it will be in the same format, even if some of the conditions may not be the same. There are some historical procedures and reporting process have already been addressed to reflect best practice across the 2 authorities to enable improvement and robustness. And in Blaenau Gwent particularly, the procedure for delegated officer decisions and reporting licensing applications and reviews to committee has been done. And also, you're going to get a quarterly activity report this morning in this committee. It is something which is not done and has never been done on the Blaenau Gwent licensing committee. However, they would like it. So I'm putting processes in place now to give them the opportunity to have the same updates that this committee gets once every quarter. Again, their committee works in a totally different way to this one. I won't go into the details of that, but just to say that we are looking at how we try and get a similar way of working between us. The other issues that had to be overcome were IT and resource issues. There were a lot of issues, as you can well imagine, trying to get IT to talk to one another. I needed to have access to the Blaenau Gwent system. They needed to have access to the Torfaen systems. It is sort of working. I'm getting into the Blaenau Gwent system now and working quite effectively on their system. However, I think there are still some difficulties coming the other way, coming from Blaenau Gwent back into here. there is, you may or may not be aware that, of course, SRS is taking over Blind and Gwent as well. So I think once that's completed, that will be smoother, the link between the two at the moment. They are two totally different systems. The other thing is IT back office systems. This is one of the things which is going to be a considerable delay in efficiency because we work on two totally different back office systems for our licence production. We looked at the possibility of going on to one system, which would have made things a lot easier, but it would have been a long-term project which would have had some expense in the short term. Particularly, implications would have been on staffing and resources in order to bring the system in. However, it's also felt that with the potential for a greater merger happening in the future, that this was not the time to move forward on trying to change back office systems. So that's on hold. However, depending on what happens with the greater merger which is proposed, then that will be on the back burner for consideration at an appropriate time to see what happens. But that is going to be a problem because the systems are just not compatible at all. They just will not talk to one another, and they don't work the same way. So we have to make the best use of what we've got, and we are working on that at the moment to try and use one system which we have got in common to its best advantage. Although that will be just for the complaints, service requests and inspections side of things. It won't be for the production of licences. And the main purpose of this report is that we sat down, both authorities, and we have produced a joint business plan, or proposed joint business plan, so that we have some sort of schedule and timescale for how we move forward with the collaboration to improve the efficiency and the working together. Some of the matters have already been discussed in the report, but the framework moving forward you'll see in the business plan, which is attached to Appendix A. We had a very successful and very productive meeting between the chairs and vice chairs of both committees recently, and I think Councillor White, Councillor Parish will support that. It was a very useful first interaction between the two committees to sort of go through and introduce our ideas and get some ideas from the members. And as a result of that, this is now being produced to be presented to the two committees. We will be repeating that, but it's also, I will be encouraging that there's a certain amount of networking done between everybody else on the two licensing committees. I think it's quite useful, and I'll be going into an event which is happening soon where that will be a starting point to make that possible. 5.9 sets out the sort of savings that are being looked at or being achieved. The savings are not significant at the moment because nothing has really changed as far as staffing resources are concerned. The sharing of managers is obviously one of the main things, but overall, when the whole of public protection goes together, which is on the cards in the near future, then obviously greater savings will be made with more managers sharing. There are some financial pressures on both authorities, and not least of which the 3-year taxi licence that came in, which reduced our fee income significantly in both authorities. And we're having to make sure that we have fees that recover our full cost recovery. In Torvine, we are happy that our fee level is set to full cost recovery. We are doing a process in Blind and Gwent at the moment to ensure that theirs will be as well. The thing about the intended use policy is not applicable to Torvine, but that is particular to Blind and Gwent. We had a small issue which we dealt with, but once we dealt with our small issue, they all went to Blind and Gwent and they ended up with a big issue, which has been, I would like to say, one of my biggest jobs since I've been up there, dealing with the issue of the number of Bristol licensed vehicles, etc., that they have working, Blind and Gwent licensed vehicles working in Bristol. So that is, and that's having an impact because their budget was set on the income for that. And of course, now that budget has gone, or is going quickly as we're dealing with the licences. Going forward, 5.10 and 5.11, the potential for financial savings will need to be balanced against a lot of different things. Staff mileage is something which we're keeping a very close eye on. It's not increased significantly, but there is a potential for it to increase significantly, and that will be monitored to make sure that no unnecessary journeys up and down the valley are made. You know, if with remote working now, I'm finding it's quite feasible that I'm working most of the time still in my own borough, not using any additional mileage, with going up there when I have to for various meetings or whatever, trying to keep it down to a minimum of once a week, on average four times a month, somewhere around there. Not always possible. Sometimes I'm up there 3 times in 1 week, but not up there the next week. It just has to be balanced against the needs of the work. And it will be the same with the officers as well, that if they're going up there, they're going up for a day for a specific purpose to do something. However, with licensing, it is always possible to ensure that any increased costs are passed on through fee setting. We don't want to do that, but it's something that we have to bear in mind that it is possible. The other impact mentioned out there is the impact on the 3-year licensing regime on staff workload during the interim years. The 3-year licensing regime means that in both councils, that all of the applications for driving licences have come in between the 1st of October 2015 and will more or less be finished by the 30th of September of this year. Then there will be 2 years when there will be only new applications, there will be no renewals, so they will have 2 years then where there will be no licences being applied for, not in bulk. So we have to look then at staff resources and how to best use those resources in the interim periods, and that's something that we have to look at across both councils. And then we also have to look at our service request demand and any new legislation that comes in. And of course there is a talk of various legislation being transferred and given powers to the Welsh Government. If that happens, and when it happens, then we'll have to deal with that as it comes along. The implications for the collaboration is that obviously managing change, and no one likes change. It can be quite stressful for staff. That has been mitigated by ensuring that staff are fully involved and consulted in all processes. All of the staff were consulted on this report and this business plan a long time before it got to got to members, so that they were aware and they had their opportunity to give input on it. So nothing was being hidden. Everything was up front and open. That was quite important. And the continuing to keep them involved in all of the policies, procedures side of it, so that everyone knows what is going on. Staff's way of working are still employed by their host authorities, existing pay scales, their existing terms and conditions, so there are no plans to change that in the immediate future. However, it would be ideal if we could have a commonality system, a common way of on the team, who does what, and etc. And if there are to be any changes to bring the ways of working closer together, that will be, again, with full consultation with everybody, including both HR sections, the unions. Everyone would be involved in that. And like I say, whilst it would be nice to go down that route, and it is in the business plan, it is not something which has been commenced or at this point. But when it is, it will be quite a big task to ensure that there's fairness and no one is disadvantaged by it. The only risks for the authorities are legal, reputational, public safety risks, are low due to being mitigated by ensuring that collaboration is centred on maintaining frontline service delivery, improvement, resilience and shared management. So that's the report. Obviously, the business plan is on the back, and I welcome any comments or questions with regards to the report or the business plan, which I'm asking the members to consider and give approval to, with or without the comments or amendments that you may suggest. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. So before we go to the recommendations, I'd just like to open it up to the committee. Do anyone have any questions that they would like to ask Steve about the report he's just?
Chair, I should be able to add a tiny bit to the report. On the 24th of February, Trading Standards, under the collaboration with Viner Gwent, came to the Safer Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. And as part of their report, licensing was considered, and the outcome of the scrutiny was 4 recommendations. One of the recommendations was to do with IT. I think it might be pertinent if I it was recommendation number 4, investigations around joint IT systems for licensing and citizens and consumer advice services are taken forward into consideration. The views of staff using the system, and the executive member's response was investigations around joint IT systems will continue, but it must be noted that any decisions to change IT systems would be subject to a sound business case being made for the proposed system, and that was to be considered. So I think I might be able to add a bit to Steve's report there.
As far as the IT back office system was concerned for licensing, obviously I'm aware of that recommendation. It is very difficult because to get an IT system changed is a big procurement process through our procurement sections, and you're talking about 2 councils' procurement sections here to get one system that works effectively. Also, you have to look at the financial implication of having to buy new systems in. We did have, within licensing, we did look at a system which would have been almost cost neutral. However, to get the business case through both councils, we found there were so many hurdles, and also looking at the resources to change over the system, to have the single back office system in the short term was found to be unreasonable. We haven't ditched the idea of having a common back office system totally, but what we have done is we've shelved it for the time being, because again, as I said earlier on, if there is a greater collaboration with the whole of all of the councils, as the Welsh Government are proposing, and I know it all depends on the outcome of the election next week as to where we go with that. But at the moment, there is a time of uncertainty. So to move forward with something like that now and commit to something which may be overturned in a couple of years' time was felt to be unreasonable. Having the common back office system is not ideal. I would love to have a back office system, as would my officers, to have that commonality. The system was there on the table. We had demonstrations. We had a basic quote, not a quote, but a costing set out for it. So we did do a lot of work on it before this decision was made. But it was made for the right reasons, based on the uncertainty of the future of where we're going, whether we stay as just the 2 of us collaborating. I mean, in the future we might have more councils involved in the collaboration, and then there would need to be a look, and we wouldn't want to start something now which we had to stop. That's the main reason for it.
Thank you, Steve. Does anyone else have any questions that they would like to ask Steve? Could I just mention that Steve mentioned about Councillor Parish and myself meeting their chair and vice chair with a totally informal meeting, and it was quite interesting to see the way that the committees both run. In Blaenau Gwent, for instance, they have to, anybody going for licensing has to appear in front of a full licensing committee, which would, I think that would mean a lot more meetings for all of us, where So, but that was one of the issues, you know, that I thought it could be. And we did also give an invite for the Blaenau Gwent licensing committee, if they wanted to ever come across to Torfaen to hear one of our meetings, whether it's a quarterly meeting or anything, that there's an invitation there for them to come along for the future. So the next thing we move on to then is the recommendations. Recommendations to note the contents of the report and give approval to the proposed business plan for the collaboration between Torfaen, Blaenau Gwent, County Borough Council's licensing service. Second is the options available to the committee are that members support the approved business plan for 2016-17 as outlined in Appendix 1 of this report. That members support the approve the business plan for 2016-17 as outlined in Appendix 1 to this report, subject to any suggested amendments to the plan that the committees consider necessary.
Chair, just before we go into the recommendations and approve them, could I just ask the financial implications to the both councils?
Well, the financial implications, there are no additional financial implications other than I've set out in the report. There's the additional costs that are potential are extra mileage, which is whilst we don't want to overdo it, it's not going to be significant. But there are no other financial implications with the business plan itself. Everything in there is basically officer time to put the things in place, putting out the consultations, etc. So those are the main financial implications with everything, the main implications, but none of them have a great financial implication.
Any other questions from anyone? If not, could we have someone to recommend the recommendations? Seconded. Thank you very much.
Sorry, which part are we recommending? Option 1 or
option
2?
1 and 2, 1 or 2? Option 1. Option 1. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for that. We now would like to go to item agenda 5, the quarterly updates at the end of the year report on all matters. That's pages 39 to 50. And will Simone be doing this report or no? Steve?
No, it will be myself, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kath.
Before we start, can I just point out that the date on the top of page 39 should read the 28th of April, not the 28th of January. Apologies for that. Okay. So the purpose of the report this morning is to update the committee on all licensing matters for the fourth quarter of 2015-16, this being the months of January, February and March, and the end of year overview. It is recommended that the committee note and comment on the contents of this report, that the committee note the activity report for the fourth quarter, and that the committee note the activity report for the annual period. So as we've already discussed, this report is to update the committee on all licensing matters, which include licences issued in the fourth quarter of the 2015-16 period and the end of year period. With regards to alcohol and entertainment, there have been 6 complaints against licensed premises in this quarter. 2 of the complaints relate to premises with club premises certificates advertising events in the public domain. As you're aware, premises with club premises certificates are restricted to provide licensable activities to club members and bona fide guests only. This differs to a premises licence, which means anybody basically can walk in off the street and use those facilities. It was noticed that these clubs were advertising non-member events, but following visits by the licensing officer and words of advice, both clubs submitted temporary event notices which allowed them to open up those premises for those events. There were 2 complaints in relation to one premise during this quarter in relation to regular disorder. One complaint was anonymous, whilst the other was sent in email format. The licensing officer offered to meet the complainant on numerous occasions to discuss the complaint, but the complainant was not forthcoming. A full investigation was carried out. The licence holder believed that the complaints were malicious, as he had cause to terminate the employment of a member of staff the week previously. The licensing officer investigated, words of advice were given and confirmed in writing. The licensing officer has gone back to the complainant, advising of this, but again the complainant hasn't been forthcoming. A complaint was also received alleging regular disorder at another premise, which included complaints of underage drinking. The licensing officer has been working with the licence holders to put into place an action plan to help prevent underage drinking by increasing staff training and due diligence. This is ongoing, and the final meeting took place this week between the licensing officer and the licence holder to review the procedures implemented. The licence holder put in place age refusals registers, staff training, which are satisfactory, and they've been encouraged to continue this, and this will be reviewed in 6 months. A counter notice has also been issued by the licensing department against the late temporary event notice that was submitted requesting live music and the sale of alcohol until 2 AM in a residential area. This was following an objection by the Environmental Health Officer on the grounds that to play live music until 2 AM would create a public nuisance. As it was a late 10, there was no provision to hold a licensing hearing, and the counter notice issued prevented the event taking place. There have been 10 premises that have not paid their annual fee during this final quarter. Following intervention from the licensing officer, whether it be means of a telephone call or a visit, all outstanding fees for this quarter have now been paid.
Yeah, certainly, yeah.
This matter comes up every single year, and as you've got less staff, I don't see why you should have to spend time chasing it up every time. I mean, for instance, when my car is due to be taxed, I get one notice from the DVLA, and if I don't tax it, I'm committing an offence, and if I get prosecuted, I get done. So why should we keep chasing these people up? Notify them once, and if they don't pay the fee, suspend the licence.
Yeah, that's right.
I feel it is not an appropriate use of officers' time to keep chasing up premises who will not pay it until you chase it up, because this happens year after year after year.
The difficulty we have with this is until the legislation changed a few years back, we had no power at all to deal with the non-payment of fees. And as a result, all we could do was go round and put pressure on with no legal backing. All we had was the debt recovery through our financial services, and of course taking people to county court is even more time consuming. However, the legislation changed in 2009 with the Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act, where it gave us powers to suspend licences where the fee is not paid by the due date. We changed our systems as a result of that change in legislation, and to be fair, that has had quite a significant positive impact on the payment of fees, because in the past we would go around chasing them and not get the fee. Now we're in a position where if they don't pay, we do suspend their licences, and what they do, they get the invoice. If that invoice is not paid by the due date, they will then get one letter, this is set in legislation, we can't change it. They get one letter which advises them that if the fee is not paid within 7 days, their licence will be suspended. If they don't pay the fee within 7 days, their licence is instantly suspended. It's basically a letter. That's all it is. But what we do, because Claire is out and about anyway, and it's usually Claire that does it, to be fair, as the lead officer on the Licensing Act, they are hand-delivered to make sure they get these letters. So they can't say, oh, it didn't turn up, it didn't arrive in the post, I didn't get the... We always get the excuses, the invoice didn't arrive in the post and things like that. So to be fair, to have only 10 non-payers this year is actually very, very good. It's not a negative, because in the past I've been chasing around, and Claire and I have been chasing around leading up to Christmas, because it's usually through December, because the invoices normally all go out in November, which is where most of the annual fees are due. So by December, just leading up to Christmas, we're going round and we're trying to get money out of people. And I know that Claire and I have had a list, and we've done 2 or 3 evenings where we've gone out to visit premises, not together, separately, because of the number we had to do. Up to 50 sometimes we've had to do in a year. So 10 is actually quite good. So, yeah, I appreciate what you say, Councillor Mills, but on the other hand, we have these processes we have to follow. We can't really do it any differently.
Chair, can I come back though? If then are we only doing what we are legally bound to do and no more?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. If we can pick back up at 5.3. Hackney and private hire licensing. There have been 23 complaints received in relation to taxi licensing during this quarter, with 3 complaints made alleging dangerous driving. Other complaints include use of a mobile phone whilst driving, private hire vehicles parked on taxi ranks, vehicles emitting thick black smoke, and children not wearing seat belts in licensed vehicles. All have been dealt with either by verbal or written warnings. A serious safeguarding issue involving a journey undertaken in a licensed vehicle was reported during this quarter. The driver is not under suspicion and is a witness for the police regarding the journey. As this matter is still under investigation, the details unfortunately cannot be provided at this meeting, but an update will be provided in due course. The licensing officer has had cause to deal with a complaint of inappropriate remarks being made by a licensed driver to a female. The driver has received a written warning following an investigation. There's also been cause to deal with a licensed driver in relation to putting private details of a young female onto a social media site. A mobile phone was found, and a picture of the screensaver, which was a photo of a young girl, was posted onto the social media site asking if anyone knew who the person was. The driver posted private details of the girl, who she knew from a school contract, including her address, etc. This has been dealt with and words of advice have been given. There have been a number of complaints received in this quarter in relation to the provision of wheelchair-accessible vehicles. Information has been provided that individuals are experiencing difficulty in being able to hire this type of vehicle after 6 o'clock in the evenings and on weekends, therefore not meeting the needs of users. The licensing officer receiving a number of applications whereby drivers are purchasing vehicles licensed as Hackney carriage vehicles and transferring them onto their own vehicles. Although a Hackney carriage plate cannot be sold, there is a loophole in the legislation which allows vehicles with this type of plate to be sold and then the vehicle changes to take place. This has meant that the drivers are not purchasing wheelchair-accessible vehicles despite there being a discount available. At this point, I'd like to hand back over to Steve, who can provide you with a further update.
Yeah. This is a problem which we've been looking at, well, since 2008, when we first brought in the first policy. We tried to do things to encourage the provision of wheelchair accessibility for the disabled community in Torvine and the visitors to Torvine. We did several things whereby we took away the cap that was on Hackney carriages and insisted that any new Hackney carriage plate, and I mean new, this means that a new plate going on, would have to be a wheelchair-accessible vehicle and could not be anything else. That, we hoped, would encourage a few more people to take out Hackney carriage licences and to put on Hackney carriage vehicles. We also, within the fee structure, gave a discount for Hackney carriage, with wheelchair accessibility to try and encourage them to purchase the vehicles. The problem is, this is a business decision by the taxi drivers. It's not something that we can necessarily impose to a greater extent. With regards to the legislation on this, there is no legislation that assists us in setting out how we do it. It's all local decision based on policy. We cannot condition private hire vehicles with regards to this in any way, shape or form. The legislation just does not allow us to legislate in that way. The legislation for hackney carriage vehicles, actually taxis on the rank, does allow us to do it. However, if we did it, it would mean that every single hackney carriage would be wheelchair accessible. We can't do a halfway house. It's either going to be all or nothing. The feedback from the trade at the moment is that there is no great demand for wheelchair accessible vehicles, and that a number of customers don't want a wheelchair accessible vehicle. They want a normal car when they go to where they will have to go. Plus, the trade themselves are in difficulty financially. They're not making a massive amount of money out there, and to buy these vehicles is quite expensive. You're talking about they can go to the auctions and buy a 4-year-old Ford Mondeo for sort of £8,000, something like that. Whereas if they go to buy one of these, 4 years old, they're talking about a cost of £12,000–13,000. Now they've got to do a lot of work to recover that amount of money. So what I'm saying to the committee is that obviously the things we have in place at the moment are not encouraging the trade to buy these vehicles, because they're saying there's not a business case for them to buy them, but we're failing our disabled community because the vehicles that are out there are not being used all of the time. Now, one of the considerations we've discussed about looking at the policies between the two councils and reviewing the policies. This is one of the areas that I've asked the officers, well, Simone in particular is looking at this particular part, look at the officers with regards to conditioning the wheelchair accessible vehicles. If they're going to get the discount, they've got to be available. They've got to be made available after 6 o'clock, because what's happening is the people who've got these vehicles are using them for their contracts, and then they're being parked up overnight. Then they're not being used for the benefit of the community. And we've had the situation where people have rung up and we've just provided them when they ring up, because obviously we can't recommend a taxi firm from the taxi office, but what we can say, these are the people who have wheelchair accessible vehicles. You can ring one of those and see if they can assist you. And to be fair, there is one or two that when we do that, because some of them are independent taxi drivers, they're not a business that you would normally see advertised on the internet or anywhere else. They usually work the ranks, have their own small client base that they have. So it's just a matter of us putting them together. But these are things that we need to consider, and the reason that I've asked Claire to put this in this report, and I'm giving you this little bit of extra update now, is to see what the members' views are and what the members' feelings are with regards to this matter, because obviously to insist that all taxis or hackney carriages become wheelchair accessible, I think is quite a drastic condition to put on, and I think it would destroy the trade that we have, which is quite good. We don't have a lot of hackney carriages in Torvine, but we have quite a good hackney trade, the ones that we do have. But we have this issue with wheelchair accessible vehicles getting a discount, but they're not being available. That's our big issue, I think, at the moment. And I just wonder what the members' views are before we go ahead and put a policy together to go out to consultation, if you have any views yourselves.
Members? Any questions?
Yeah. I'd be interested to know if a survey's been carried out and what you have as the current figures from the North Torvine to South Torvine, the number of wheelchair accessible taxis available for the population.
The number of wheelchair accessible vehicles wouldn't be separated between the North and the South. The biggest problem with the demographics of our taxi trade, or the whole of our hire trade, should I say, in Torvine is that the biggest proportion of the companies with the biggest fleets are based in Cwmbran, because that's the biggest commercial centre where they're going to get the trade from all of the other things. and they are licensed for the whole of Torvine. There are a couple of businesses up in the north area, Capital Hire being one of them, who have a number of minibuses, etc. But they're not whilst they do private hire work, they're not running necessarily. It's not someone that people ring up necessarily in the evening to pick up the trade, because most of their work is contract work. Most of their vehicles are on contract work. Much the same with A to B down in Cwmbran. Most of their vehicles are on contract work, and for that contract work they have to have wheelchair accessible vehicles. So therefore they're benefiting both from the contract work and from our discount on the fee. So that the fee discount is not working. That's the first thing I will say to you. That is definitely not working. It is not encouraging new people to come in with their wheelchair accessible vehicles and make them available, I won't say 24/7, but certainly at reasonable hours. And it is benefiting people who are using them, would have to have them anyway, in most cases. There are some, but it is very much the minority. As far as the number of actual wheelchair accessible vehicles that we license, it's quite a small number. Out of a fleet of over 300 vehicles, I haven't got the exact figure here, but I will get that figure and circulate it to you. But it is less, and I mean less than about 20 or 30 vehicles that have actually Wilson. About 19, 20, Simone has just said. I will circulate the committee the exact figure after the meeting. But it is not a significant amount when you consider that most of those vehicles are being used during the day on the contract work and then parked up overnight. There are one or two that are not, that are used on the ranks. But these are the ones, this is where Claire came in about the transfers of the plates. Because what happens is the plate, when we say we issue a new plate to a vehicle, it has to go on a wheelchair accessible vehicle. Well, some have done that. They've bought a wheelchair accessible vehicle to go on the rank with one of these new plates. They can never put a normal vehicle on that plate. It has to be wheelchair accessible. That was the idea behind that policy, which was brought in 2008. The problem is what they will do if someone's giving up taxiing and their vehicle was basically on its last legs, they will buy that vehicle with the plate on it. They will then transfer their wheelchair accessible vehicle onto that plate, all legally acceptable and all legally possible. We can't stop them doing it. And then, when they replace that vehicle, they'll replace it with a Ford Mondeo. So we're going to, what I'm seeing, this has happened on a couple of occasions recently where people with wheelchair accessible vehicles have actually done this, and I can see the trend that when they finish with that vehicle, when that vehicle's up for renewal or replacement, they're going to replace it with a saloon because they don't want to have the wheelchair accessible vehicle. The taxi drivers will tell you that none of the customers they have want to get in these big wheelchair accessible vehicles. That's a matter that I can't answer.
Thanks for that. And obviously I appreciate the fact that when a taxi is licensed, and the majority are in Cwmbran, that they're licensed throughout the borough. But there was reasoning behind the fact I was differentiating between the north and the south, because when it comes to disabled people needing taxis, disabled people, there is no demographics. They're evenly distributed, not distributed, but there's an even balance right through the population of Torvine, north to south. However, on the taxis, I appreciate that the taxi availabilities, whether you're able or disabled-bodied, in the north of Torvine is a lot less. So therefore, if you're looking at disabled access to taxis, there is an imbalance in the north of the Torvine, and it's less accessible for those in the north of Torvine, given the statistics you just... So I wondered if you've actually done a consultation or some kind of stats on the north of the borough compared with the south of availability for taxis that have disabled access to the population between the two sides of the borough.
Well, we haven't done a survey, but off the top of my head, and I think, and Simone will give me a nudge if I've got this wrong, we've only got 2 or 3 small companies working in the north of the borough, the biggest one being Capital Hire, and like I say, most of their work they're using on contract work. None of those have got wheelchair accessible vehicles, except for Capital Hire, as was mentioned, but none of the companies that are on the end of a phone on a day-to-day basis, and the hackneys that are sitting on the rank in George Street and Pontypool. There are no companies at all north of Abersucken. And to get for anybody to get a licensed hackney carriage or a licensed vehicle to go up to Blenavon, it is quite hard work because the companies don't want to go up there because it's a long way. And of course, they're going to do a journey which will be X number of pounds, but they've got to double that journey if they've got to go all the way up and all the way back. So it's a business decision by these companies, and which I understand, that it is very difficult to serve a population, especially if I talk about Blenavon particularly, and it does leave a gap. And so it is very difficult because we cannot control the business side of this trade. We cannot control that at all. It is totally outside of our powers. As far as wheelchair accessibility north, it is very poor. The only company who have wheelchair accessibility north of New Inn, should I say, is Capital Hire. It's Capital Hire. They are mainly minibuses because they're doing the school contracts and the social services contracts and things like that for many councils, not just Torvine. They work for Monmouthshire as well as and other councils. So they've got the vehicles, but they're not necessarily readily available in the evening because, as you'll probably notice yourself, that most of those vehicles are parked up all over the place because they're used by the same driver who's a part-time person who just goes and does the school contracts, and they're parked up on the side of the road all over the county. So it's a very difficult situation, and that's why I'm bringing it to this committee to sort of point out that we have a difficulty here. We have a lack of a service to disabled people, and we have difficulty in trying to get that service to be effective, and point out the difficulties. As far as demographics are concerned, as I say, I think we've probably got, out of the 300 and odd vehicle fleet we have, I would say less than 20% of those are north of New Inn, to be fair. Most of them are based in and around the Cumbraen area.
It's just a final one, that given that we've acknowledged and highlighted that there is more of a problem in the north of the borough, whether it can or can't be, surely that needs to be focused on addressing, whether it be incentives or discounts or whatever, more for the north to actually, I don't know if this is possible, and again, I know it's business, but if that is the problem, that needs to be focused before you're looking at the umbrella or the helicopter view of the whole of the borough. There is definitely a service or a concern, and we have a duty of care to the elderly in the north to try and balance the demographics.
The difficulty is always going to be is people are not going to set themselves up in business to make a loss. And the issue here is business decisions and rational business decisions, because the work that you must accept that there isn't as much work in the north of the borough as there is in the south of the borough, and it's purely down to demographics of the business opportunities, and we cannot affect people. We can't force people to set up a business or to set up a service. It is not subsidised. We would have to subsidise that service quite significantly for that to happen. And I don't think that we are in either a legal or a financial position to do that.
Councillor Kemp?
Are we aware of how many of our residents use wheelchairs across Torvine, and the demographics, whether there's more up north or down south? Have there been any research in regarding that?
Simple answer, no. I think to try and find that out would be quite difficult. I don't know how I would even go about doing the research on that. There may be some figures somewhere, but it's people's private lives, isn't it? It may be something on the census that may assist us. I'm not sure, but I don't know when the last census was done and how up to date and how accurate that would be. But certainly to try and do a survey like that would be, I would suggest, is almost impossible.
Thank you, Steve. Claire, would you like to continue?
Thank you, Chair. 5.4, child sexual exploitation and taxi licensing. The safeguarding training that was mentioned in the last quarterly report has now been carried out. 222 of 254 drivers licensed with the borough have now undergone the training. Follow-up sessions for those who are yet to have the training are scheduled to take place in May and June. This course is a mandatory training course, and any driver who does not sit this may have their Hackney Carriage private hire driver's licences reviewed. All members of the licensing team have attended the course and have found it beneficial.
Yeah, Councillor Mills.
Thanks. This came about following a recommendation from the Healthier Scrutiny Committee, and we're in the hat as the chair of the Healthier Scrutiny Committee. Can I congratulate you to get 222 drivers through this test in such a short time is really exemplary, and I really think that's something that we should put in Torvine Talks, because it shows that the recommendation from a scrutiny committee is actioned quickly and implemented, and I feel that the children of Torvine are much safer because this training's happened. So well done.
Thank you, Councillor Mills. Can I just say that there was a couple of other things that are in this report which are relevant to this, but we have done an article for Torvine Talks. It's with Communications now, and it's based on the fact we've done this training and some of the proactive stuff we've taken towards safeguarding vulnerable people with regards to taxi licensing. So that is with the Communications unit now. Thank you.
Councillor Parish.
Have you had any feedback from the drivers themselves? How do they feel about it?
I think generally it was quite negative when they were told they had to do it. And not all. We have a quite an eclectic mix of taxi drivers out there, as some of you may have met some of them. And some who went have taken it on board and accepted it, either very vocally or quietly. And as you would expect, there are some that perhaps haven't taken it in quite the same way. But the beauty of it is they've done the training now, they've had the awareness training, and there have been other top-up sessions as well, which have been done by the police on top of what Torvine Training have done, which is the one that I should be talking to you about in a minute with the thing I put on your desk. And with regards to that, but they now know. So they can't turn around at a committee meeting and say, well, I didn't realise. Or actually, you should have realised because you've had the training. Do you see what I mean? So we're not using it as a big stick, but if we have to, we will use it at a committee meeting to say this driver was trained in safeguarding. They were told this on the safeguarding course, which is why I'm going to go on in a minute to encourage everybody on this committee to go on the safeguarding course, which is on the email in front of you. So I've just jumped ahead a bit, but it's relevant. So, because you may be sat on a committee meeting which is reviewing one of these licences in due course, and you'll need to know the sort of things they've been told. Yeah? So that's the reasoning for doing, that's a member training thing, that email. It's all for members only, that one. Members and officers will be going to that one at USC on the 23rd of May. So I would encourage every single member of this committee to attend that training, please. I appreciate there's some that can't do it, but it is quite important. So so there are some which have probably taken it and probably walked away and thought, what a load of rubbish, without saying it out loud. I'm sure there are. But the bottom line is that some have been very vocal about it, to be fair, as well. And we've got our eye, we think, right, okay, we'll bear that in mind as well. Of course, we're not there at every training session, so we don't know the results. But it's just bits and pieces that are coming back to us from one or two people. So the bottom line is that once we've got them down as having done it, then at least if something does happen, and we have had incidents, and Claire will be going into that in shortly, we have had incidents, and you've heard them in that report earlier on, sorry, not she will be, she has done, where it's been quite relevant to us. 2 incidents, whilst we've been doing this training, have happened because we've become aware. If that makes sense? Yeah. So it is, yeah, there has been a mixed bag. Yeah.
Can I also just add that we've already been notified by some of the safeguarding people that issues are already being reported by the taxi drivers. So they've been supplied with all the contact numbers, email addresses, all the out-of-hour numbers, and they are already bringing issues through. So it is working.
That's really good to know that, you know, if it's only a handful of cases, that's progress, isn't it? It's progress. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Claire, if you would like to continue.
Okay, so moving on with the report. There have been no complaints in this quarter in relation to gambling or smoking in enclosed public places. In relation to street trading, there have been 8 complaints during this final quarter of the year. Information has been provided to the licensing officer, in particular a list of vehicles that are allegedly carrying out street trading without the required permission. The complaint is ongoing and further information will be provided at the next licensing committee. There's been no complaints with regards to charity collections. In relation to scrap metal, there have been 2 complaints during this 4th quarter. A complaint was received that a premise or a business was operating as an unlicensed scrap metal site. The licensing officer visited with the police licensing officer and no evidence was found to prove that they were. The second complaint relates to observations of the licensing officers whilst out in the area carrying out enforcement duties. An unmarked vehicle was observed collecting discarded materials from outside an industrial unit. The licensing officer has obtained details of the vehicle owner and has written to him requesting that he contact the licensing office to discuss further. In relation to updates regarding prosecutions and appeals, we have 3. It was reported at the last committee that the Magistrates' Court was due to hear an appeal against the licensing panel's decision to refuse to grant a Hackney Carriage private hire driver's licence. The Magistrates' Court upheld the Council's decision not to grant. The applicant, Mr Asgar, appealed to Crown Court. The appeal was dismissed by the court last week. Following the police operation in December of last year to stop an illegal taxi operating in the Blynavan area, the individual pleaded guilty by post and the matter was heard at Magistrates' Court on Monday the 18th of April. The driver received a £900 fine for a total of 3 separate offences and was ordered to pay £522 costs. The driver also received penalty points on his DVLA licence following a police prosecution for no insurance on that vehicle. It was reported at the last committee that a prosecution was due to be heard at Magistrates' Court in relation to an illegal scrap metal collector. The case was adjourned and the committee will be updated at the next meeting should there be any further information. There have been 2 delegated decisions during this period. One was in relation to a driver who had accumulated 9 live penalty points on his DVLA driving licence. A report was prepared for delegated decision by the Chief Officer, who decided to refer the matter to licensing panel. The panel determined that the driver could keep his licence and no further action was required at this time. The second delegated decision referred to a licensed driver who received a police caution for taking items into prison. It was the decision of the Chief Officer to issue a warning letter. There have been 2 licensing hearings this quarter. One was following the referral from the Chief Officer and was discussed in 6.1. The second was to determine a new application for a driver's licence. The applicant has a history of 2 drink driving convictions, the latest being within the last 10 years. This application had to be determined at panel as it was outside of the Council's policy in relation to Hackney Carriage and private hire licensing. It was the decision of the panel to grant the application. Number 8, the licensing team performance. The activity report for the licensing team is attached to Appendix A. The majority of the targets have been met, but there are some areas in which the team have underachieved. As previously reported, one of the licensing officers was on maternity leave for 9 months of the year, but since her return the number of inspections have increased, and this is reflected in the last quarter of the activity report. We've already discussed collaboration between Blaenau Gwent and Torfaen, and the licensing team leader has updated the committee on the progress of the collaboration between the two authorities' licensing services, which commenced on the 1st of October 2015. The solicitors from both Torfaen and Blaenau Gwent councils met with the team leader to discuss the annual member training following the AGMs for both councils. It is proposed that the training will be a joint session at a neutral venue for all members of both committees. It will cover common areas and not council-specific areas. This will also be an opportunity for members of both councils to network. I'll pass back over to Steve now, who will provide you with further updates.
Yeah, I haven't got a lot more to say on that because I was going to put the safeguarding training in on the back of this as well. But it is felt that it would be beneficial, obviously, for members. It would be a good opportunity for you to meet and network. We'll all be talking about a common purpose. Like I say, what we'll do is, if there's any local specific issues that need to be brought up with regards to our individual policies, we can do that at a committee meeting like this. We can add it on to the quarterly report, which is something which I've taken from Blaenau Gwent that they do little training sessions when they have their committee meetings. So they'll have a 10 or 15 minutes on a particular subject. And I think that's quite useful because it just brings it in, and it might be relevant to something which is in the report as well. But the two solicitors, which is Justine, who you know, and Martin Woodland is the solicitor from Blaenau Gwent, Justine's equivalent up there. We sat down and we worked out an agenda, we've worked out a training programme. We're just looking for a venue now. Obviously, we're waiting until after the AGM because we never know who will be returning on our licensing committees at both councils until after the AGM next month. So once we have those details, we will be inviting everyone to this one venue for this training session.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Claire, for an excellent report, Claire. As you can see in item agenda 13, recommendations, that the committee note the comments of the contents of this report. That's one. Two, that the committee note the effectively reports of the final quarter 2015-16. That the committee note the activity report on the annual period of 2015-16. Could I have someone to propose that, please? Thank you, Councillor Mills. Second. Thank you, Councillor Stevens.
Can I come in regarding the safeguarding of children? I don't know if you're aware, Steve, but members have recently received an email or a couple of emails from Richard Grinnell, and there's a safeguarding training course happening on that day, on the 23rd of May, and it's a level 1 safeguarding course, and it's to be held, I believe, at Mount Pleasant Hall. So you might want to have a word with Richard Grinnell, in regarding, because there might be duplication. Richard's email has come out a good couple of weeks ago, but obviously this has only been brought to members' attention, I believe, only this week, and so there's 2 courses which will be happening on safeguarding on the same day, I believe.
Right, well, first of all, I'm sorry, I was not aware of the one that Richard Grinnell has sent out. This has been arranged by the Collaborative Gwent Licensing Forum, so for every member in Gwent. So all 5 councils, Caerphilly, Newport, Blaenau Gwent, Torfaen and Monmouthshire are invited to this event. There's no way I can change it now because it's being set up by Monmouthshire at Usk at their council chamber for all of the members. Now, all I will say is, for the members of our committee, I'm not sure whether the one internal one that Richard Grinnell is setting up is likely to be repeated. I will have to find out, and I'll speak to Richard after this meeting to find out. The one for the members here is going to be aimed specifically at licensing with regards to pubs, clubs, taxis. I'm pretty sure that Richards will not be. It will be a general thing because they'll be looking at all the social services aspects, education, childcare and all of the things which we won't be looking at within the licensing regime. I will contact Richard to try and find out exactly what is happening that day and whether that is likely to be repeated. But what I will do, if it is a clash which we can't avoid, then I will do well. It's already on the training agenda, which I mentioned earlier on. But I will be doing a piece on that at the member training, which we do after the AGM, which I've already mentioned, which hasn't been arranged yet. So that at the worst case scenario, but I'm always willing to sit down. But I have sat down with all of you already and gone through safeguarding with taxi licensing, so I know that you're fairly well up to speed with it as well. I'm going to have to just leave it to your discretion as to which training event you attend. I would obviously, being a little bit selfish, I would prefer if you went to ours because it's to do with licensing. However, I understand that that licensing is that there's a bigger part in the council with safeguarding than just licensing. So I would have to leave that to you. Thank you.
Steve, I've just emailed you the email from Richard Gwinnell for the details.
Thank you, Steve. Well, just before I close it, I'd like to thank the licensing team. They're a small team. They've worked extremely hard. I think we've had some fantastic results over the last couple of years, and I'd just like to thank them, perhaps on behalf of the committee, for the outstanding work they've done this year. And I then would like to just close the meeting, thank everyone for attending, and wish you all the best. Thank you.